So let's put this on the table. Speaking of naive, I still, more than the two of you by far, I think, have faith that government can work. Okay, let's put that on the table.
I got it. I'm not trying to be pedantic. What do you mean work? Government can achieve goals. That is not in dispute.
Can achieve goals effectively to build a better world.
Okay.
A functioning society.
So I'm going to take it one step further than you.
Oh, boy.
The only way to achieve a better world is through government.
Michael, what do you think about that?
He almost dropped, and I said it on purpose that way.
No, I'm glad that the mask is dropping.
You cannot have liberty or freedom without a government. Now, not anything like the governments we have today. So I think the idea that you can have liberty or freedom without government is the rejection of the idea of liberty and freedom. And the undermining of any effort, any attempt to do it. So in that sense, I agree with
he's sitting right here, right?
Lex. I know, exactly. On this side, I'm in agreement with Lex,
Yeah,
which is unusual.
that government is good for freedom.
You're agreeing with the guy who's reading Mein Kampf. That's not a surprise.
Who's dressed in black.
Yeah, that's the bad guys.
No, the fascism. The road to fascism is anarchy. It's not.
What the hell are you talking about?
Anarchy.
Can you give me one example of when anarchy led to fascism?
Well, every example of stateless society leads to authoritarianism. Every single one in all of human history.
And
It has to because.
Wait, you're saying Weimar
has
Germany was anarchy?
Well, it wasn't pure anarchy, but it got close. But no,
I didn't say.
I said the reverse. By the way,
Okay,
I said
go
the
ahead.
reverse. I didn't say that every form of authoritarianism started with anarchy. I said that every situation in which human beings lived under anarchy led to authoritarianism. So I said the flip result.
Anarchism isn't a location. Anarchism is a relationship. The three of us are in an anarchist relationship. Every country is in a relationship of anarchy toward each other. The US and Canada have an anarchist relationship toward one another. And to claim, going back to Emma Goldman, who I love, in 1901, President McKinley was shot by this guy, Leon Salgaz. And it was very funny because he was a crazy person. And they arrested him. He shot the president. And they go, "Why did you shoot President McKinley?" And he just goes, "I was radicalized by Emma Goldman." And she's like, "Oh, God damn it." So now she's on the lam. She had nothing to do with this guy. She's trying to flee. She gets arrested. They caught her. And she said, and this is the hubris of this woman, which I admire as the subject of ego and hubris. She goes, "I'd like to thank the cops for doing what they're doing. They're turning far more people into anarchism than I could do on my own." So given everything you've said in these 2 hours, and then to pivot to being anti-government is being anti-liberty, I don't feel I have to say anything.
Well,
That's
okay.
fine.
For people who are not familiar, I don't know why you would not be familiar, but Michael Malice talks quite a bit about the evils of the state and government, and espouses ideas that anarchism is actually, the most moral system, the most effective system for human relationships.
There's this great book called Atlas Shrugged, and the author posits an anarchist private society. She calls it Galt's Gulch, where everything is privately owned and no one is in a position of authority over anyone else other than the landowner. That's an anarchist society.
There's one judge, and one authority.
Yeah. And that's what everyone and that's what everyone has voluntarily moved there and agreed to be under.
It's a very small community, right?
Sure, that is right. So I have no problem with competing governments.
That's the definition of anarchism.
What's that?
That's the definition of anarchism. Case closed. Okay, end the show.
No.
End the show. I got him over.
Not
Mission
definition.
accomplished.
Not definition of anarchy at all. I'm all for competing governments.
You get more cookies. Good job. He did it. Yay, Yaron! You brought him over.
More Lithuanian.
What is this class?
Lithuanian. That's my people.
Tulski, Yasnaya Polyana, Medom, с honey.
Oh, it's honey.
No claims of health or nutrition.
The other one claimed health. This one no claims. I'm for
claims.
competing governments on different geographic areas. That's fine.
Why does it have to be over? Okay, let me.
It's really crucial that it's on different. So you don't have two judges in Galt's Gulch. You have one, and there's a reason. There's one authority. There's one system of laws in Galt's Gulch, that all the people under the gulch abide by. There's one.
There's two because they're in America.
No,
So
they're not. The whole point is they're not, right?
They're not
So
in America. They're in Colorado.
I know, but the whole point of the novel is they've left America.
They haven't left America.
They've hid themselves, so they're not under the authority of the American.
But they are. Don't you
they're
get
not.
it?
But they're hidden.
They're
They're
not.
supposed to
Hold
be
on.
completely
The point
hidden.
is that they're hidden, so they're not under the
No.
guys.
If the three of us hide, we're still under the authority of Washington.
No, but not if they don't know.
But
that
this is
we
why they
exist.
haven't established a state, and it's not a government, and it's not in that sense, an example of really the way we form societies. It is a private club that is hidden away from everybody else.
Fine. I'm fine with that. What happens if an American kills a Canadian in Mexico?
What happens in American? It depends on the nature of the governments of the three places, right? But usually, what happens in most of human history is that America will launch a war either against Mexico or Canada.
Okay, just first of all,
Right? So usually violence results in much more violence. Anarchy is just a system that legalizes violence. That's all it does. And in international affairs, that's the reality. The reality is that the way you resolve disputes that are major disputes is through violence.
Ayn Rand said the definition of a government is an agency that has a monopoly of force in a geographical area.
That's right.
So you can't complain that anarchism is legalizing violence when the definition of government, according to Rand, is legalized violence.
No, but because you're taking the definition of violence the way she defines it, right, in this context. She talks about retaliatory force only. And
Has that ever happened?
That's not the point.
That is the point.
Before there was Aristotle, was in Aristotle. Before there was an America, was in America. The fact that something has never existed means that it will never exist before. The fact that the ideas haven't been developed to make something exist means that it will never exist before. We're young. Human race is a young race. The ideas of freedom are very young. The ideas of the Enlightenment are just 250 years old. The idea that you can't create the kind of government Ayn Rand talked about, I talk about, that it's never been before means it'll never happen again. That's a silly argument.
It's not a silly argument. It's you're being a Platonist. And
No, not at all.
I'll explain to you how you're being exactly a Platonist.
So if I was sitting in 1750 arguing with Thomas Jefferson, he was telling me what kind of state he was going to create. And I said, is a state like this ever been created? And he said, no. Was I being a Platonist? Of course not.
No, you're being a Platonist.
Things change.
You're being a Platonist now. Here's why you're being a Platonist now. Because one of the things that Aristotle believed in, one of the things that Ayn Rand in other contexts believed in, the cover of her book, The Philosophy Who Needs It, is, I think it's the Sistine Chapel, the cover, or wherever it is. It's Aristotle and Plato walking.
No, it's not. Yeah, but
what's that painting?
Yeah,
I forget what it is.
It's School of Athens.
School of Athens. Thank you.
It's Raphael.
So Plato's pointing toward the heavens while they're talking, and Aristotle's pointing to the earth.
Reality.
Reality.
Absolutely.
So if you want, there's two approaches. There's the Descartes Cartesian approach, which is I sit in my armchair and I deduce all of reality. Or if I want to study the nature of man, if I want to study the nature of dogs, if I want to study the nature of the sun, I have to look around. I have to open my eyes. I have to look at data. It's very difficult. When Rand was on Donahue, he asked her about, aren't you impressed with the order in the universe? And she goes, oh, now you have to give me a moment. And the point she made, which was very hard for many people to grasp, it's hard for me to grasp, is one's concept of order comes from the universe. You can't have a disorderly universe because order means describing that which exists and which has existed.
Sure.
Now, if you are looking at governments throughout history that have always existed, and when you were on Lex, you said, what I'm talking about has never existed.
That's right.
To say that therefore, that has a possibility of working in reality, I think is certainly not a point in that favor, number one. And number two, Jefferson was a fraud. What Jefferson argued how America would look did not come true. Jefferson's concerns about the Constitution were accurate. And the fact is the federal government did become centralized, did become a civil war. So if you told Mr. Jefferson, our government you're positing can't work, you would have been correct.
That's not what I'm saying. It's not the issue of can it work or not. It's the issue of can something exist that hasn't existed in the past. It's a silly argument. Now, we can argue about the facts of reality, whether such a thing can exist, but to say it hasn't existed in the past is not an argument about whether it can exist in the future. But that's the argument you made.
But no, you're talking about history and now you're dancing around it.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying that something different happened in the founding of America. It might not have been perfect,
Sure.
might not have been ideal. It might have been, some people even think it was bad, right?
Sure, it
But
was
something different happened.
Sure.
And you could have sat 20 years before and said, well, that's never happened before, so it can't happen in the future. That is a bad argument. It's not a good argument. Irrelevant.
No, but you're making the argument that just because something hasn't happened before, that's certainly not a point to say it's likely to happen or possible.
No, I'm saying, first of all, I agree that everything we know about what's possible or what's not possible has to be from reality. That we agree completely. I think anarchists completely evade that point. I think you guys live in a world of mythology, of abstraction, of Descartes. To imagine the kind of anarchy that David Friedman or Rothbard describe, it's complete fiction. It's complete.
It's just name calling.
Mysticism.
Okay, let me ask you just a few dumb questions. So first of all, what do we do with violence? In terms of just natural emergence of violence in human societies.
Sure.
So the idea that anarchism proposes is that we would, as the community grows, there may be violence, and then we together form collectives that sort of fund mechanisms that resist that violence. I mean, I'd love to sort of talk about violence because that seems to be the core thing. That's the difference between the state that definitionally, I guess, is the thing that has a monopoly on violence or controls violence in such a way that you don't have to worry about it. And then the anarchism, I don't know.
I'm just laughing because
I'm using bad words.
No, your definition is accurate, but the point is that being the definition of the state versus how states act in reality is just absurd. Yeah.
So, and then the idea that anarchism would be is that it's more kind of a market of defenses against violence. So you have like security companies, and then you hire different ones that are more competent.
You have things being made affordable. You have more accessibility to security. You have accountability when people misuse their power, and you have more layers of security than having a government monopoly. Objectivists understand, and they don't deny this. This is something they talk about constantly. Is anytime you have a government monopoly, it's going to have enormous distortions as a consequence. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be ineffective. And when you're talking about ineffectiveness in markets, that's not just, like the cup sucks. It often means mass death. It often means persecution. So this is something that anarchism, if not entirely prevents, certainly mitigates enormously.
So can I just, as a thought experiment,
Sure.
say it was very easy to immigrate to another country, like where you could just move about from government to government.
Sure.
Would that alleviate most of the problems that you have towards the state, which is like people being free to choose which government they operate under? Wouldn't that essentially
Ask him. Yeah.
So like, I'm trying to understand why governments aren't already the thing that's the goal of anarchism. The kind of collectives that emerge under anarchism seems to be what government...
You're equating two terms.
Yeah.
So there's something called like private governance and there's government. So for example, if I go to Yaron's house and he has a rule, take off your shoes, become your house. If you want to really be kind of silly about it, you could say he's the governor. But it's really nonsensical to say that. If you go to Macy's, right? If you want to return your sweater, Macy's rules are right up there. You have 7 days. If you don't have a receipt, you're going to get store credit. If you do have a receipt, you get a refund. So every organization, every bar, every nightclub, your house has rules of governance. It's often they're unspoken. This is unavoidable. No one in America, by law, has to pay a tip, but it's just customary. You go with the waiter, you give them 15, 20%, so on and so forth. Now, what anarchism does is it says, okay, security is something that is of crucial, essential human need. We all need to be safe in our property, safe in our purpose. The organization that by far is the biggest violator of this, and always has been, always will be, is the government. Why? Because it's a monopoly, because it has no accountability. And look at the rioting last year, right? If you have one agency, pretend it's not the government, pretend it's Apple. And Apple has in charge of security in this town. People are rioting, people are looting. And Apple says, yeah, we're not going to send people into work. And if you try to defend yourself, we're going to put you in jail as well. That's the problem of having a government monopoly. And that's something that anarchism solves for.
So, okay. But don't you, because you said no accountability, don't you mean to say poor accountability?
No, I mean to say no accountability.
I mean, but isn't that the idea of democracies?
I'm not for democracy.
No, not for democracy, but like the system of governments that we have, there is a monopoly on violence, but there is I mean, at least in the ideal, but I think in practice as well, there's an accountability.
I do not think
I
that's
know
the
you're a
case.
critic of the police force and all those kinds of things, but the military is accountable to the people.
I do not
The
agree.
police force is accountable
not
to the
agree.
people. Perhaps imperfectly.
I do
but
not-
you're saying not at all.
Not at all. And we've seen many examples of police officers doing horrific things on video, and they don't even lose their pension.
But there's a lot of amazing police officers, or no?
No, they're not.
So you're saying by nature, police is like a fundamentally flawed system?
No, by nature, government monopoly on police is a fundamentally irredeemable system. We talk about private security. If I have a private security firm, you could have that under a government. And as a result of my private security, my person who I'm bodyguarding gets shot. That's going to be very bad for my company as compared to competing companies. However, when you have a government monopoly and I get people shot, what are you going to do?
So the problem is that all the examples are going to be within the context of an existing government. This is why I said the cell phone example and all these other examples of us being here. We're not in anarchy. That is absurd. We're under a particular system of law, and the system of laws applies, and we know that the particular system of laws applies. So the problem is when you have
there are many laws that we're not going to be enforced, that we're not
sure,
really subject
we know
to.
that.
Violence
We know
related?
that. No, there are lots of laws that are not going to be enforced. Right. That doesn't make this anarchy because there are other laws out there. They could be enforced, which makes an enormous business. But look, there's a number of issues here. There's an issue of the role of force in human society.
I got to clarify a thing because I think you misunderstood what I said. I'm not saying that America is anarchist. What I'm saying is the three of us have an anarchist relationship between us because none of us have authority over the others. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's a bad use of the word anarchy.
No, that's the correct use of the word anarchy.
It makes it meaningless. It makes it every time any people get together, they have an anarchistic relationship.
Yes.
No, we have a
That's the basis of
voluntary
humanity.
relationship.
That's what anarchism means,
No,
voluntarism.
no,
Yeah,
it doesn't. It's
No, it doesn't.
a political
You want to
system.
get a dictionary out?
You're taking a word and it's accepted usage, and then you're saying, oh no, it means
selfishness.
maybe, and we never finished that discussion. We're taking a word that you're defining as and replacing it with voluntary. Now,
Okay, fine. I'm not for anarchism or voluntarism. Fine, go ahead.
But let's understand what voluntary means, right? So we, for example, go into stores and there's a certain relationship that we have with the store that we engage in certain voluntary transactions with that store. Now, I believe that works because there is a certain system of law that both the store and we have accepted that makes that possible. Now, if that didn't, there are certain people who would like to walk into their store and just take the stuff, right? So there is we might not, but there are certain people who might want it to go into their store. There's a certain system of laws that regulates the relationship and that defines the property rights and then provides protection for the property rights. Now, you would like all that privatized. Yes. That is, the store would have its police force, and that would be privatized. Now, I don't believe that force can be privatized. And there are many reasons.
It shouldn't.
I don't think it can, and I don't think I think it's
That's an interesting distinction.
I don't think it can because I think that it's an unstable equilibrium, right? I don't think competing police forces can work. At the end, the police force with the biggest gun always wins and always takes over.
That's not true.
And
because
becomes
look at
authoritarian.
Vietnam, look at Iran and Iraq, excuse me. We had the bigger guns. We didn't win. Look at Afghanistan.
We didn't win partially because none of that is an example of anarchy.
No, but you just said the guy with the biggest gun is going to win.
Yeah, the guy with the biggest gun.
We didn't win in Vietnam. We had the bigger guns.
But again, you're taking it outside of a context. That was a context in which countries are fighting, not a context in which there is no country.
Okay, let's suppose you, Yaron, have a rocket launcher.
Yes.
And there's 100 people with handguns. How are you going to win? You have the biggest gun.
Oh, believe me, I could win.
With one rocket launcher against 100 people?
Yeah, it's a good. Well, it depends how many rockets I have in the rocket launcher and whether I'm willing to use them. So now it's democracy because there are more of them that they win. Look, any one of these scenarios, All it does. So let's go back to the store. So
This is fascinating, by the way. I'm really enjoying this. I just want to say that this is great. Because
I'm glad you are.
I am enjoying the pain.
And I'm also enjoying the comments that are going to happen.
Oh, the comments are going to be overwhelmingly on your side.
I don't
know
think
that.
so.
Because people like
I don't
honesty.
think so.
No, I think the anarchy position is completely dishonest.
I'm a modern day, what's his name? What's the guy who was defending communism?
Oh, Richard Wolff.
I'm a modern day Richard Wolff.
There's a sense in which I think anarchists are evading reality in the same sense. So we've got this.
Do you think I'm dishonest or delusional?
I think you're
Calling someone
dishonest
dishonest is a really
That's
specific
true.
thing.
I think you're delusional.
I think you're delusional, and I'm going to give you the benefit of a doubt of being delusional.
Okay, good.
and
That's fair.
We all
That's
love
fair.
each other.
And as I said,
is love?
and as I said on the show, on the previous interview, I said only smart people can be anarchists because it requires a certain level of abstraction of being divorced from reality that is hard for people who are actually connected to reality.
He makes a good point because I always talk about this with people on social media, and they talk about a lot of people who buy into the corporate media narrative and how they're dumb. I go, it's easier to train smart people than dumb people. It's easier to convince smart people of the systemic that's divorced from reality than someone who's dumb.
They can deal in abstractions.
Yeah.
They don't have to deal with the concretes that actually happen. This is an example I gave debating another anarchist. So
Who was it? She must have sucked.
Well,
they
you
were
are the
they
best.
were Hoppe fans.
Oh, okay, Hoppe, okay.
Hoppe fans, not one of my least the people I like the least in the world out there.
You like them better than the communists, don't you?
Barely.
Oh, come on. Seriously?
Yes, because I think it leads to the same place. I really do. I think it leads to gulags.
Fine.
I think anarchy
Hold
leads to
on.
gulags. And I think Hoppe's view of anarchy definitely leads to gulags.
I'll grant you just for the sake of argument
Yeah.
that it leads to gulags.
Yeah.
However, surely you concede that they are against gulags, whereas the commies have no problem with it. And that's
Yeah.
a big
I think some do. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Oh, that's
I'm
fair.
not sure people
That's
like Hoppe
fair,
do
yeah.
because if you read some of his stuff, one wonders, right? But wants monarchies and he wants.
No, he said monarchies are preferable to democracy,
Yeah,
which is
well,
true.
No, it's not. Oh God. I mean, one of the problems with anarchists is
One judge. That's the
is
monarch.
that one of the problems. Yeah, one judge, one authority. This
Yeah,
is why
the
I think
monarch.
that's why I think
So you're a
anarchists are authoritarians.
So Yaron Brook's a Hoppian.
No, I'm
Get
not
in the
a Hoppian. I
chopper.
don't want one judge. I don't want an arbitrary judge. I want an objective judge.
There's an essay by John Hassness, I think his name, I'm going to bungle it. It's going to be in my upcoming book on anarchism. And he just discusses, and it's a very long, complicated technical issue, that the idea of objective law is incoherent.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why we disagree so much.
Yeah.
Because I think objective law is the only coherent system.
Do you disagree that we, in effect, have competing systems of law under America? Meaning there's different ideologies. You have the Sotomayor ideology versus the Scalia ideology, and that effectively, and the point being, when you and I file a lawsuit, it completely depends on who the judge is.
Yes, and
Okay.
in theory, I don't think the system works this way, but in theory, the way the system would work is that on new issues, there is some competition.
Nice to meet you.
Siri, I wasn't talking to you. Technology.
Capitalism.
So in theory, the system works, and this works, I think, with competing states, but also with competing legal views, particularly on a new issue. There's some. This is how common law worked, right? There's some evolution of it, and at some point, that gets codified into the law, and it gets objectified in that sense. That is, there's some conclusion that people come to. This is the role, in theory, of a legislature, and the legislature would be nice if it was composed of people who had some idea of legal philosophy.
Sure.
And it gets codified, and because these things are complex, and at some point it goes through all the arguments, and then a certain truth emerges or certain truth is identified, and that's what gets encoded in law. That's what the purpose of a legislature is. Now, if you have competing mechanisms that don't converge on one authority, because there's no one authority. There are multiple authorities. That is, in a sense, there are multiple governments or multiple systems of enforcement, right? Then you get not just something emerging out of it. What you get is competing legal systems. Competing legal systems that now have competing mechanisms of enforcement, competing police forces, competing militaries, however we want to define it. And now there's no mechanism to resolve that. Now, yes, we could negotiate and there's goodwill and so on, right?
Yeah,
no,
there you go.
No, but now we're talking about the law, what each position views as true and right? And it might involve, for example, the fact that the legal system has come to the conclusion that it's okay for children to have sex with adults, and this legal system thinks that is evil and wrong,
Sure,
right? And something has happened, right, between the two, right? How do you resolve that conflict? There is no resolution. If this adult wants to have sex with this child, this legal system thinks it's okay, that legal system thinks it. The only way to resolve that system is through one system imposing itself on the other. An example of countries is exactly that. When you had monarchies, when you had little states all over the place, the way any kind of dispute was resolved when there were issues of territorial disputes or issues of marriage or issues of different legal interpretations was war.
No, it wasn't.
Yes,
it was marriage. A lot of times people would marry a princess from another country. Just to have peace.
Forced marriages, which was not very pleasant.
I'd rather sacrifice one princess than an army.
No, I don't want to sacrifice anybody. And in addition, I don't want to sacrifice anybody.
I want to sacrifice the royals.
And in addition, well, I don't want royals.
Well, that's what sacrificing
I think royals
means.
are pretty disgusting.
Agreed.
And then
Let's get the baskets.
And then on top of that, look, those periods in history are filled with violence, much more violence than we have today, much more bloody than they are today, far less freedom than we have today in terms of individual
You're comparing
freedom.
this to the 20th century.
Yes, I'm comparing a monarchy, right? You said that's preferable to democracy.
Yes,
right?
I did.
I'm comparing.
I'm saying Hoppe said that. I'm not saying I'm saying that.
Oh, I thought you.
To some extent,
agreed.
To some extent, but I'm not going to die in that hill.
Hoppe said that, and I think it's ridiculous. These kings and queens were fighting constantly. I mean, the wars back then were violent in a way that,
unlike now.
No, much more violent than now. If you look at the actual percentage of people killed in war,
the Steven Pinker book. Yeah.
If you look at the percentage of people, and not just that, you can look at other stats. The percentage of people killed in war back then were far greater than the percentage of people even during World War II and World War I. So anarchy, and David Friedman loves to quote the sagas of Iceland about how wonderful the anarchy. And I mean, it's funny because a lot of people who read David Friedman never read the sagas. It's worth reading. The sagas of the Iceland are filled with violence. Constant violence, constantly people killing each other over, I stole your chickens and you slept with my wife. And the only way to resolve disputes was violence. There was no authority. There was no mechanism to resolve these disputes. There was a council, but the council couldn't enforce anything. So in the end of the day, we just resolved to violence. And this is legalized because there is no mechanism by which to make the violence illegal. So all anarchy is legalized violence, constrained up, for a while, and up until people stop that constraint by, arrangements between the security organizations. Yeah. But the security organizations have us by the balls, to put it figuratively, right? They really do.
Sure. Unlike the state?
Oh, the state today has it, but I would much rather live in this state, much rather live in many more authoritarian states than this, than a place where there's constant violence.
I have a bunch of questions, but I'm enjoying this.
Here's why everything he said is wrong.
Okay, yes.
First of all, the idea of competing legal systems is inevitable because what Rand talked about is what she wanted was, and this is really kind of out of character with her broader ideology, is I think this was her term, and I'm not saying this to make fun of you. When she has a judge and he's looking at the information, she wants him to be basically, I think she used the word robot, someone without any ideology, that they're just looking at the facts. They're not bringing their kind of worldview to it.
I take it as a compliment.
You are welcome. I think that given otherwise, her correct view that calling something ideology is just a slur for someone's philosophy, that someone, especially someone as erudite, educated, and informed as a judge, has to, and in fact should, bring their ideology to their work, is in one sense a little contradiction in her view, number one. Number two is, we have right now the DA in San Francisco. I forget his name. He's the son of literal terrorists, communist terrorists. And he has made the decree unilaterally that if you shoplift for less than, I forget, $200, we're not prosecuting.
Yeah, I know that.
You know this game. Right. Yeah. So now you and I, and Lex, I'm sure, probably agree that his ideology is abhorrent. that this doesn't help poor people. It doesn't help shop owners. It creates a culture, an area where it's just deleterious to human life.
Yeah.
However, he has, in one sense, given that he is a state operative, a legitimate worldview.
Can I ask you just a quick question?
Sure.
Why couldn't a security force in a particular context say, yeah, if you take stuff from that store, we're not gonna have any problem with that?
I agree with you. That's very fair. That's a very legitimate question. The point is, in the context that I'm talking about, that firm is like, wait a minute, I'm hiring you for security. You're saying we're not going to provide security. Why am I writing you a check? And we have examples of this in real life. If I get into a car accident with you, right? You have your car insurance. I have my car insurance. If your car insurance had their druthers, they wouldn't pay me 1 penny. If my car insurance didn't have their druthers, they wouldn't pay you 1 penny. We already have you were saying earlier that we need to have one kind of umbrella mechanism of use. There are already more cases than you can count where there's private arbitration. Now, the argument is that private arbitration only works because they have recourse to the government. But my point is, there's many examples where even though that recourse is theoretically possible, it's not a realistic concern, specifically because they know that if you have recourse to the state, you have no concept of what that outcome is going to look like, except knowing it's going to be exorbitant, it's going to be time consuming.
We can't use the state, right? I mean, I'm as critical as the state as it is right now. Maybe not as critical as yours, not as critical as yours, but I'm quite critical of the state as it is right now. But let's say we got into a traffic accident and you have a Rolls Royce, and I destroyed your Rolls Royce, and my insurance company now owes your insurance company a lot of money. And let's imagine it's a lot of money just for the sake.
And now you're clearly guilty.
Clearly guilty. And my insurance company looks at the books and it goes, I don't want to pay this.
Sure.
And you know what? I've got bigger guns than his insurance company.
Sure.
And I'm just gonna take over their insurance company. And hostile takeover takes on a whole new meaning when I can muster guns on my behalf than in a hostile takeover in a capitalist context. That to me is what happens. That to me is inevitably what happens. And I think this is where the delusion comes in. The idea that everything that when big money is involved and big and power is involved, remember, again, the same kind of politicians who today get into politics are likely to want to run some of these security agencies because they'll have a lot of power over people. So the same kind of maybe sociopaths would be.
I don't think it's the same skill set, but that's a separate issue.
I think it very much is. But
you think the people in Washington are the same as CEOs psychologically and skill set wise?
Well, today's CEOs, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
you might be right.
Because I think that's what's rewarded for CEO is somebody who could get along with government.
Okay.
And I think the kind of CEO who is going to run a security company, which is not just about business. It's about the use of force. It's about control. It's about negotiation with other entities that are using force. Diplomacy. Then negate and we should get back to objective law because I think it's essential to this whole argument. I think all you get into is security agencies fighting security agencies, and again, the biggest gun. And I don't mean here the guy who has the biggest literal gun, the rocket launcher versus the guns.
I got excited for a second.
By the biggest gun.
Yeah.
The party that has the more physical force, however that is mustered either by numbers or by weapons, is going to dominate.
Can I
and will take over everybody else. Now, one of the things that's common in a market is takeovers. It's consolidation. And here, the consolidation can happen through force, and you can roll other security companies, and that's exactly what will happen until you dominate the particular geographic area.
Okay, so let me explain why I disagree with that. You were just saying, and I agree correctly, I agree with you, that, listen, if I have access to the bigger gun, why am I paying you or whoever's paying whatever? I'm just going to use force and not pay them. We have that right now. It's called lobbying.
Yeah.
So instead of me, and I'm sure in your example you weren't being literal, instead of the insurance company literally having the army, they could be like, hey, let me call Corruptco, the mafia.
I agree.
Yeah, go out and take them out.
Yeah.
By having this federal government, as you know, and certainly I'm not a fan of, takes more through asset forfeiture than burglaries combined. What asset forfeiture is, people don't even understand this. This is something crazy, which Yaron is as opposed to me as opposed as I am, which is I'm a cop. I go to your house. I think you haven't been charged or convicted of anything. Or have evidence.
It's usually in a car.
Yeah. But no, it's like drug deals. Okay, I go to your house. You're a drug dealer. I say, and you can understand the reasoning. Well, if someone is getting profit through illegal mechanisms, their profit isn't real, their property, and they shouldn't be rewarded that profit. So basically, I go to your house, you're a drug dealer, I seize all your property.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really have recourse, even though you haven't been through I'm just explaining to the audience, through due process and SOL. That combined, for people who don't know, is more than the total amount of burglaries in America. It's a huge and what happens is the police department, which seizes your car, auctions it, seizes your house, auctions it. It's a great way to line their pockets. This is a huge incentive. It's horrible. It's a huge incentive for police departments to do this because it's like, look, this guy's a crook. Maybe he's not a drug dealer, but he's clearly a pimp. Let me just take all his stuff and it's going to go to the community.
Well, and the rationale originally was, if I try him, in the meantime, he'll take that money and, funnel it somewhere else and hide it, and I'll never be able to get access to it. And it was passed in the 1970s under the original CSID laws, were kind of RICO Act, going after the mafia. And one of the reasons I despise Giuliani as much as I do, and there's very few politicians out there that I despise more, is because he was the first guy to use RICO on financiers.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't even a drug dealer. It was, you were accused of a financial fraud. You weren't shown to be guilty.
Accused. Yeah.
All your assets basically were forfeited.
Innocent until proven guilty went out the window.
If you were managing money, you were done. You were finished.
So you're saying this kind of stuff naturally merges with the state.
Hold on. So my point is, what are presented as the strongest criticism of anarchism are inevitably descriptions of status quo. What you're describing is already the event. I am a big insurance company. I don't want to pay you. I call Washington. Either I pay you and Washington gives me a subsidy. So what you're describing is an inevitable aspect of having a government.
What I'm describing is the inevitable evolution of anarchy into a government. I just think that the
markets don't consolidate into monopoly. That's a leftist propaganda myth.
Not markets where you have substitute products. But this is the problem. The problem is force has no substitute. That is, force is not a product you can have. So this is my fundamental issue about turning competing police forces. Force is not a product. Force is not a service. It's not a service, and it's not a product.
Security is not a service?
No. Well, security in the context of a legal system is. But this is the point. The legal system, the laws, are not a service or a product. They are a different type of human institution. Science is not a product or service. It's a different type of human institution. There are different types of human institutions. Sure. Some are marketable. You can create markets in. Some you cannot. Law is not a marketable system.
Can I ask a question quickly? Is there any other field other than law that you think you can't create markets?
Well, science. Science is not marketable. The science itself is not marketable. What's
sure.
Science is true. And the same ethic is in law. Law is not marketable. Law is the system that allows markets to happen. Right? You need a system of law, whether it's private law in a particular narrow context or whether it's broader law. Law is the context in which markets arise. So one of the reasons we transact is we know that there's a certain contract between us, explicit or implicit, that is protected by a certain law, whether it's protected by a private agency or the government, doesn't matter. But there's a certain contract that is protectable, right, by a system. Theoretically, yes. So law is the context in which markets arise. You don't create a market because there's nothing above it, in a sense. It is the context that allows markets to be created. Once you market it, markets fall apart.
So hold on a second. Yeah, hold on. So you think that law could be a market?
And it already is a market. And we see it, for example, eBay. If I am buying something from Yaron, I won't even know his name. I don't know. Maybe he's in another country. He screws me out of the money. I don't have access. I can't sue you. If I sue you in England, it's good luck with that. You're not going to argue that I'm going to sue you. What happens in this case, which has already been solved by the market, eBay and PayPal, which has access to your bank account, they act as the private arbiter. They're going to get it wrong a lot. Not even a question. Just like Yaron's not going to argue that the government right now gets it wrong a lot. That's not even a question. Mm-hmm. The point is, at the very least, I'm going to get my resolution faster, cheaper, and more effectively. So the issue with having any kind of government anything, and Yaron's not going to disagree with this, is at the very least, it's going to be expensive, inefficient, and cause conflict.
Yeah, but I think what it allows is
We don't even know what the Supreme Court's going to judge.
Again, you're moving us to today's environment, which I'm against.
To reality.
Right? No, but reality doesn't have to be what it is. I mean,
that's the most anti-Rand quote.
No, in a sense of the politics, the political reality.
I know, but the quote by itself is great.
I know. You'd love to.
He agrees with Donald Hoffman, as what
it turns out I agree with Hoffman.
He's an elf. That's what it is.
So it's where were we? So I believe that because we have a certain system of government, right? It allows for these private innovations to come about that facilitate certain issues in a much more efficient way than the government would deal with it. But it's only because we have a particular system that has defined property rights, that has a clear view of what property rights are. It has a clear view of what a transaction means, or what contract law is. And eBay has a bunch of stuff that you sign, whether you read it or not. Of course. All of that is defined first. And then there are massive innovations at the level of particular transactions, at the level of an eBay, that facilitate increased efficiency. And that's great. But the fact is, none of that gets developed. None of that gets created in a world in which I might be living under a different definition of property rights. eBay might be living under a separate definition of property rights. You might have a third definition of property rights. And there's no mechanism by which we can actually operationalize that, because we all have a different system.
There is a mechanism. We already have that. Let's change the example I just used. What happens if a Chinese person who has different definition of property rights kills an American in Brazil?
Again, in a smaller community, what happens is lots of violence.
No, but I'm talking about right now. If a Chinese person has...
Right now, the only reason that it doesn't lead to violence is because people are afraid of even more violence, and it affects many people, large numbers of people who don't want to go to war. But if you have small... in a state where the states were small, right? In those little states, there was war all the time for exactly those reasons. Because the cost was lower, because it was more personal, because I knew maybe the person who was killed over there, and I went to my king and encouraged him to go to war.
You know why there was war?
Violence is constant.
You know why there was war? Because there had been no Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
And good ideas lead to good societies, which leads to good people, which lead to good behavior, good interrelationships. So now that we have Ayn Rand,
yes,
all this stuff in the past is irrelevant, because if they studied her works, we would be... Rand was on Donahue again. You could watch the clip. And he asks her, he goes, you're saying that if we were more selfish and acted more self-interest, there'd be less war, less Hitler? And she said, there wouldn't be any. Right.
That's right. Well, if we were all selfish, there wouldn't be any Hitlers, right?
But who do you regard as the overweening authority if I am buying a product from you as someone in England via eBay? Who's the governing authority?
The governing authority are the legal systems in England and the United States, which have to be synchronized pretty well.
Right, but what I'm saying is,
why eBay doesn't function in certain countries, because there is no legal system.
I agree with you. My point is, why do those legal systems have to be a function specifically of geography, as opposed to why can't I, sitting here, I could sit here, let me finish my point. Yeah. I can sit here and be a British diplomat, right? And as a British diplomat, I'm going to be treated differently under American law than you are as an American citizen, as you are. Why can't you have that same process? Sure, we're geographically proximate, but I'm a citizen of this company and you're a citizen of that company. Why would that be different in your opinion?
If it's England and the United States, it's probably not going to matter that much, right? But if it's Iran and the United States, then the fact that we're sitting next to each other makes a huge difference. Massive difference. And the fact is that, and Ayn Rand, I think, would be the first to acknowledge this, and this is why she was so opposed to anarchy. That's not why. It is.
It's because of Rothbard.
No, it has nothing to do with
nothing.
It has nothing to do with
nothing.
Rothbard. Nothing.
How do you know?
Nothing.
How would you know?
Because argument against against anarchy as an intellectual one, not a personality.
Can it be
one.
both?
Anyway, but
No,
back
it
to
has
it. Back to Iran.
No, it has nothing to do with Rothbard.
You don't know that. You're not a psychic. You don't, or a necromancer.
The only way we're going to resolve this is arm wrestling, right? It's through violence.
Arm wrestling's not violence.
I'm kidding.
Words of violence.
Words are violence, Yaron.
Words of violence, emotions of violence.
So wait, but
He throws me off with this stuff.
but
That's the problem.
Even
right?
facts and
He's
truth?
very, very good. No, not facts and truth.
I mean, there's
distortions and arbitrary statements. Because your statement about Rothbard is an arbitrary statement that has no cognitive standing. And therefore I can dismiss it. So I'm not doing like this because I want to dismiss it. It has no cognitive status. The fact that she disliked Rothbard doesn't mean that everything he said she was going to dismiss because she disliked him.
I agree with you. But what I'm saying is it would not be impossible.
But there's no evidence.
I'll give you some evidence. Human psychology. It is not impossible that if you hate some, what's his name? What's that guy's name?
Richard Wolff.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not impossible
Yes.
that if Richard Wolff said something that you would otherwise agree with, hold on, let me finish. You'd be dismissive or less likely to give him credit for it, being a human being. That's all I'm saying.
It's as silly as to say Rothbard came up with his theory of anarchy because he was pissed off at Ayn Rand and wanted to write something.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Bring
that's my
it
point.
down because bring it down so that he can speak too, and let's keep it because
I don't think we're getting agitated.
No,
I didn't
you
take it
guys
that way.
aren't. No.
Yeah.
No, bring it down not in terms of give more pauses
Okay.
so
Okay.
Michael can insert himself. That's what I mean.
See, private
What's
governance.
the point of that?
Private
No,
governance. Look, private. It's private governance.
I'm all for private
I'm trying
governance. I
to
think private
establish
governance
a
is
geographic
great.
law of the land.
That's
I don't
not
know.
the point.
I do think that Michael's. I mean, that's interesting that you disagree with this. I do believe that psychology has an impact on ideas. And Ayn Rand, you don't think Ayn Rand had grudges that impacted the way she saw the world? We would like to think that.
I don't think any of her grudges entered into philosophical statements, at least not that I can tell. And I don't see, and given the centrality Ayn Rand gave, and if you to the role of government, to the existence of government, to the need for government, to establish real freedom, and the way she defines freedom, which is very different than Rothbard, and the way she defines government, to say then that her opposition to anarchy is because of, I think is just an arbitrary statement.
I didn't say because
and
of.
not,
I didn't
and
say
not,
because. I
and
said
not,
colored by.
And I don't see why psychology would enter it. Yep. Now, maybe the tone in which she responded to an answer might have been motivated by that, something like. But given the amount of thought she gave to the role of government in human society and why government was needed, and why you needed laws in order to be free, that freedom didn't precede the right. You needed the right hierarchy. I think that we could say that give it at least the respect that she might have been wrong, right? But she had a particular theory that rejected anarchy and that thought anarchy was wrong.
Okay, hold on. I really resent, and I'm not saying you're doing this, the implication that if Rand was guided by her passions, that somehow is a criticism of her or lessens her. I think Rand was a very passionate person.
Absolutely.
I think she loved her husband enormously. She despised certain people enormously.
Sure.
And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that.
I don't think she would change her philosophical position about something because she disliked somebody.
I agree, but what I'm
Given
saying...
the amount of thought she gave to that philosophical position.
All I'm saying is it is possible that if someone comes across ideas that she had not considered before, if she regarded this person as a bad actor, like all of us, she would be less likely to take them under consideration.
Sure.
That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
Right.
And I think other people confronted her with the ideas of anarchy. I don't think Rothbard was the only one.
Correct. Roy Charles as well. Yeah.
Roy Charles certainly did. And she rejected them. And she rejected them because she had, and whether you agree with her or not, she had a thought out position about why you needed to have this particular structure in place so that markets and human freedom could exist.
It's just really interesting because this is the one time, in my view, and please correct me if I'm wrong, where she invokes need as kind of a basis for political activity. So let's suppose you want this federal government, whatever you want. You don't want it like it is now, but like your version of the government. I don't see why it's an issue for you, for me and Lex, to say we're not privy to Washington. We're going to do our own thing. And given if we go about our lives not initiating force and being productive actors, why she would have an issue with this?
Why would I care?
Well, you would care because if you're saying the government has a monopoly on force between these two oceans,
So you can do
hold on,
that
let me
as long
finish.
as you
Can I
don't
finish?
violate somebody else's rights.
Sure, but what I'm saying is we just declare ourselves sovereign. We're not going to pay any income taxes. We're going to be peaceable people. We're going to contribute. And when Lex and I have disputes, we're going to call Joe. That's Joe Rogan. You're never going to get to meet him, but he's a good guy.
I know.
We're going to call Joe, and Joe's going to resolve it between
He's
us.
so good at like, needling and getting you off topic that way. It's
beautiful.
he's really effective at it.
He's like Muhammad Ali, and you're Joe Frazier.
I always say when I debate communists, I always say to them,
You mean Lex?
yeah, maybe Lex, maybe I should view this as
Comrade,
Lex.
I love you.
That if they really believe
Burgundy, not red.
if they really believe in what they think, then they should be advocates for capitalism. Because under capitalism, under my system of government, capitalist government, right, they could go and start a commune. They can live as communists. They can live to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability, all they want, and live their pathetic, miserable lives that way. And the government would never intervene because the whole view of capitalism is freedom, is we leave them alone, right? As long as you're not violating my rights, as long as you're not taking my property, as long as you're not engaging with. So in that sense, yeah, you and Lex can form your own thing. I don't believe in compulsory taxes anyway. So you and Lex can do your own thing, never pay taxes. Do your thing as long as you're not violating the laws, and the laws are very limited, right? Because they're only there to protect individual rights. So as long as you're not violating somebody else's property rights or inflicting force on anybody else, you're peaceful. You can do what you want.
Great. Case
Don't
closed.
don't have sex with kids. Right?
I will stop immediately.
Good.
The rest of us are just
so
playing
it's-
checkers, and he's playing chess.
Yeah,
so.
I mean,
I'm like,
a government that protects individual rights properly is a government that leaves you alone to live your life as you see fit, even if you live your life in a way that I don't approve of, that I don't think is right. I mean, that's the whole point, right?
okay, then we're in complete agreement.
The only thing you can do is, try to enforce arbitrary laws that you come up with
Sure.
on me.
Of course, absolutely.
Right.
Okay, great.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a world where the rights protecting laws are superfluous, but the reality is usually that somebody violates them, whether by accident or intentionally, and that you need some mechanism. Now, if you guys can resolve that dispute without getting involved, fine. But if you guys land up not resolving, there is another authority that will help you resolve it.
Yeah.
So can I ask you a question? Under anarchism,
I always do.
what kind of systems of laws do you think will emerge? Do you think we'll have basically a similar kind of layer of universal law to where, like,
Let me answer this. This is a great question. I know where you're going with this. This is often presented as a criticism of anarchism. And this is actually something I think Yaron would agree with as well in other contexts, which is this. One of the reasons communism can't work, central planning can't work, and this was one of Mises's great innovations, is if I could sit down, it's like asking, what would the fashion industry look like if the government didn't run it? There's no way for me to know. What the fashion industry is, which all of us are in favor of it being free, is literally millions of designers, of seamstresses, of people who make the fabric. Also references throughout history and these creative artistic minds putting things together in every year. And there's no shortage of clothes. In fact, we make so many clothes that we send them in landfill sizes to overseas poor countries. And you have people in these destitute countries wearing like Adidas shirts. They can't even read English, but because we don't know what to do with all these clothes. That's how the glory of free enterprise is. The problem is problem use this loosely. Everything comes cheap and overabundant. It's like food,
Well, it doesn't actually come overabundant.
But
If it's done properly.
Sure.
It's the
That's fair.
Supply meets demand.
Sure, that's fair. But I'm saying is like if 150 years ago you said, one day we're going to have an issue where there's going to be so much food and
Obesity,
that the kids are too fat. It's just going to be like, too fat. Like I have 4 who are dead in the crib. I wish. I mean, what kind of paradise is this? So what you would have, we have this right now in certain senses. You have the Hasidim, you have Sharia, you have I'm sure in the medical system, they have their own kind of private courts, and court martials is another example of this, although obviously that's through the state. So you would have innovation in law under markets just the same ways you'd have it. And we have this already. Maybe it's not, Yaron doesn't like in terms of like murder and rape, and I can understand why. But in terms of like business and interactions, he would have no problem with different arbitration firms having different rules for like what kind of evidence is allowed. Maybe you only have 60 days to make your case, and so on and so forth. And the market is a process of creative innovation, and it would be dynamic. It would be changing.
So
over
what's
time.
interesting? What's interesting relating to this is that one of the ways Ayn Rand proposed raising revenue for the government, because she was against, was, let's say we have a contract. We could just have it arbitrated without government interfering. But if we wanted to access the courts of the government as a final authority, we would pay. And that's how governments would raise some of the funds, would be raised that way. So there's definitely a value to having this innovation in the public space. But I don't believe that is the case with murder. I don't believe that is the case with violent crime. And it's funny you bring up Sharia, because David Friedman, when he gives
Wait, I got to ask you to clarify. I'm not trying to interrupt you. You were talking about with murder. I mean, you would agree, I think, just to clarify for the audience, that there is room for innovation in murder because there's things like manslaughter, there's murder 1, murder 2.
Oh, yeah. I don't think
different.
it happens at a market level. I don't think there's a market innovation for murder. Somebody has to figure out what those standards are. But they will evolve as we gain more knowledge.
But we're all in agreement that the word murder means very different things.
Oh, absolutely. And if circumstances matter, and what do you standards of proof and standards of evidence, all of that there has to be
and
a
consequences
standard.
too. Yes,
all of that there has to be a standard, and that's what I think a proper government provides. But so David Friedman uses in some of his talks about private law, he uses Sharia law in Somalia as an example. Look, legal systems evolve privately, independent. Yeah, authoritarian ones that don't respect the rights of women at all. Are you married?
No, but we all want to have sex with our mother, as Freud would say.
Oh my God, can we make that a clip?
Yep.
Where the hell did that come from?
That's much better than what I was just saying about the kids.
I appreciate that. Okay, so we went in a voluntary way, although sometimes for Yaron and sometimes for Michael it felt involuntary. But we all got the big guns. So how do we land this? Clearly, there's a disagreement about anarchism here.
I think I think there's a big agreement, because if Yaron was saying that if I want to have my voluntary stupid thing with you, and his government is not going to tax me and is not going to insinuate itself unless we're murdering each other, something like that, I'm okay with that.
So if you take the example of Sharia law, which was mentioned earlier. So if you have a little community within my world, right, that imposes Sharia law, if it starts mutilating little girls,
sure,
then you impose your law on it, right? You impose the law on it because it's an issue protecting individual rights. If they want to treat women, if women have to cover up, and the women are okay with that, that's fine. If the woman wants to leave but is not allowed to leave, that's where my government would step in and allow her, prevent them from using force against her. And that's it, right?
Okay.
Now, I think it's more complicated than that, right? Because I think there are complex issue of property rights often where it's not going to be easy for you guys to resolve, and particularly if you interact with people outside of your community.
Sure.
But yeah, that's my view is government is there to protect individual rights. That's it. Otherwise, leave you alone.